Elena Whitmore dropped the teacup the moment her father said the word marriage. It shattered against the polished floor, and the sound echoed through the drawing room like a warning bell. Her father did not flinch. He stood by the window with his hands clasped behind his back, refusing to look at her. "You have already signed the papers," Elena said, her voice shaking. "You promised my hand to a man I have never even met." "His name is Julian Ashford," her father said. "The arrangement is final. There is nothing more to discuss." Elena felt the walls of the room close in around her. She had spent years building a quiet, careful life, one where nobody asked too many questions about her past. Now her father had handed her future to a stranger, and she had no say in the matter. "Why him?" she asked. "Why now?" Her father's jaw tightened. "Because he asked for you specifically, not for your dowry, not for our family name. He asked for you, Elena, by name." That detail struck her harder than anything else. A man she had never met, asking for her by name, as if he already knew something about her that she did not know about him. That evening, she was told to prepare for a formal dinner, where she would meet her betrothed for the first time. She stood in front of her mirror, smoothing the front of her dark green dress, trying to steady her breathing. She told herself this was only a business arrangement, nothing more. Men like Julian Ashford married for land, for influence, for convenience. It would be easy to remain distant. It would be easy to protect herself. She was wrong. The dining hall was lit with candles when she walked in, and the first thing she noticed was how quiet the room became. Julian Ashford stood near the head of the table, tall and composed, dressed in a dark coat that made him look older than his years. His eyes found her the instant she entered, and something about his gaze made her stop mid-step. He did not smile. He did not offer the polite greetings she expected from a nobleman meeting his future wife. Instead, he studied her, as if he were confirming something he already believed to be true. "Miss Whitmore," he said, his voice low and steady, "it is good to finally meet you." "Finally?" she repeated. "We have never met before tonight." A flicker of something crossed his face, gone before she could name it. "Of course," he said. "Forgive me. I meant only that I have heard a great deal about you." Elena did not believe him, but she said nothing. She took her seat across from him, and the dinner began with the usual empty conversation about weather, trade routes, and the upcoming harvest season. She answered politely, giving nothing away, watching him carefully in return. Julian Ashford was not what she expected. She had imagined an older man, hardened by business dealings, indifferent to everything except profit. Instead, he was young, sharp-eyed, and unsettlingly observant. Every time she spoke, he listened, as though her words carried more weight than they should. Halfway through the meal, he asked her a question that made her hand freeze around her fork. "Do you still walk along the eastern cliffs at night, Miss Whitmore?" The room seemed to grow colder. Elena forced herself to keep her expression calm, though her heart pounded against her ribs. Nobody knew about the cliffs. Nobody knew about the nights she used to disappear from the house, seeking silence away from her father's expectations and the suffocating rules of her life. "I do not know what you mean," she said carefully. Julian held her gaze for a long moment. "My apologies," he said finally. "I must have confused you with someone else." But she did not believe that either. After dinner, her father pulled her aside in the hallway, his face lit with something close to relief. "You see," he said. "He is respectable, educated. He will provide for you." "He knows things about me," Elena whispered, "things I never told anyone." Her father waved a hand dismissively. "Nonsense. The man has simply done his research, as any good suitor would. Do not let your nerves invent shadows where there are none." But Elena had learned long ago to trust her instincts, and every instinct she had was screaming that something about Julian Ashford was deeply, dangerously wrong. That night, she could not sleep. She sat by her window, staring out at the dark line of the cliffs in the distance, remembering the secret she had buried there years ago. A secret that, if uncovered, would destroy not only her reputation, but her entire family's standing in society. She had told no one. She had been careful, meticulous, certain that the truth had died with the only other person who knew it. Yet Julian Ashford had looked at her tonight as though he could see straight through the walls she had built. The following morning, her father announced the engagement formally to the household staff and extended family. Word would spread quickly through the town. There would be no turning back now. Elena stood beside her father as he made the announcement, her hands folded, her expression carefully blank, while inside she felt as though the ground beneath her had cracked wide open. Julian arrived later that day to discuss wedding preparations, and this time he came alone, without the formal escort he had brought the night before. He found her in the garden, sitting on a stone bench beneath the old oak tree, and he approached slowly, as though giving her time to retreat if she wished. She did not retreat. "You seem troubled, Miss Whitmore," he said, standing a respectful distance away. "I am to marry a man I do not know," she said flatly. "Troubled seems like a fair description." He was quiet for a moment. "I understand this arrangement was not your choice." "Was it yours?" she asked, studying his face. Something shifted behind his eyes, something that looked almost like guilt. "Not entirely," he admitted, "but I did not object to it." "Why not?" He hesitated, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked uncertain. "Because I believe we have more in common than you realize." Elena stood, crossing her arms. "You keep speaking in riddles, Mr. Ashford. Last night you asked about the cliffs. Today you speak of things in common. If you know something about me, I would rather you say it plainly than circle around it like a hawk waiting to strike." Julian's expression hardened, though not with anger. It looked more like restraint. "There are things I cannot say yet," he said. "Not because I wish to hide them from you, but because the truth is complicated, and I do not want to frighten you before you have reason to trust me." "I already have reason to be frightened," Elena said quietly. He took a step closer, his voice softening. "I promise you, Elena, I mean you no harm. If anything, I have spent years trying to protect the very secret you believe only you carry." Her breath caught. "What do you know?" But before he could answer, a servant appeared at the garden gate, announcing that her father required her presence inside. Julian stepped back immediately, his composed mask sliding back into place. "We will speak again," he said. "I give you my word." Elena watched him walk away, her mind racing with questions that had no answers yet. She had entered this arrangement, believing she was being forced to marry a stranger. Now she understood that the truth was far more dangerous. Julian Ashford was not a stranger at all. He was someone who already knew her, in ways she could not yet explain, and whatever connected them reached back into the very secret she had spent years trying to bury. As she walked back toward the house, she glanced once more toward the eastern cliffs, and for the first time in years, she felt the old fear rise in her chest, sharp and unrelenting. Whatever Julian Ashford knew, it was only a matter of time before the truth came looking for her, whether she was ready for it or not. Inside the house, her father was waiting with a stack of papers spread across his desk, lists of guests, dates for the ceremony, and figures that seemed to matter more to him than his daughter's feelings. He barely looked up when she entered. "The wedding will take place in 6 weeks," he said. "Mr. Ashford has agreed to cover the costs, which is more generosity than we could have hoped for, given our circumstances." "Our circumstances," Elena repeated. "You mean the debts you never told me about?" Her father's hand paused over the papers. "You were not meant to know about that." "I know more than you think," she said quietly. "I have known for months that we are close to losing everything. Is that why you agreed to this marriage so quickly? Because Julian Ashford offered to solve a problem you created?" Her father finally looked at her, and for a moment, the confident mask he always wore slipped, revealing something closer to exhaustion. "This family needed saving, Elena. I did what any father would do. You sold my future to save your pride." "I saved your future," he snapped. "Without this marriage, we would have lost the house, the land, everything your mother worked to build before she died. Would you have preferred that?" Elena said nothing. There was truth in his words, even if she did not want to admit it. She turned and left the study, without another word, her thoughts a tangled mess of anger, fear, and the unsettling suspicion that Julian Ashford's interest in her went far beyond convenience or debt. Later, as she passed the hallway mirror, she caught her own reflection and barely recognized the woman staring back. Days ago, her life had felt predictable, even if it was lonely. Now everything had shifted, and she could feel the old secret she had buried, pressing against the edges of her carefully built world, threatening to break free. She thought of the cliffs again, of the night that had changed everything, of the promise she had made to herself never to speak of it. Julian Ashford's question echoed in her mind, refusing to fade. He had asked about the cliffs as though he already knew the answer, as though he had been there himself, watching from the shadows while she believed she was completely alone. That night, alone in her room, she took out an old wooden box hidden beneath the floorboards, one she had not opened in years. Inside was a single folded letter, yellowed with age, the only remaining evidence of what had happened on the cliffs that night long ago. She stared at it for a long time, her hands trembling, before finally closing the box and sliding it back into hiding. Whatever was coming, she would need to be ready, because if Julian Ashford truly knew her secret, then the life she had carefully built for herself was about to change forever, and there would be no simple way to protect herself from what came next. 6 weeks felt like an impossibly short amount of time to prepare for a wedding, yet for Elena, each day dragged by with unbearable slowness. She spent her mornings fitting gowns she did not choose, her afternoons listening to her father discuss finances with lawyers, and her evenings staring out at the cliffs, wondering how much Julian Ashford truly knew. She decided the only way to protect herself was to learn everything she could about him first. She began quietly, asking careful questions of the household staff, the local shopkeepers, and anyone who might have crossed paths with the Ashford family. What she learned only deepened her unease. Julian had inherited his estate at a young age, after his parents died under circumstances the townspeople rarely discussed openly. Some said it was illness. Others whispered about an accident on the very cliffs Elena had walked so many nights ago. Nobody seemed to agree on the details, but everyone agreed on one thing. The Ashford name carried a shadow that had never fully lifted. She tried to dismiss the rumors as gossip, the kind that followed any wealthy family with a tragic past. But the coincidence of the cliffs unsettled her too deeply to ignore. Julian visited twice a week to help with wedding arrangements, and each time, Elena studied him more closely than she let on. He was polite, composed, careful with his words. Yet beneath his calm exterior, she began to notice small cracks, moments where his guard slipped just enough to reveal something rawer underneath. One afternoon, as they walked together through the garden discussing flower arrangements neither of them cared about, Elena decided to test him directly. "You mentioned once that we have more in common than I realize," she said. "I would like you to explain what you meant." Julian's steps slowed. "Not yet," he said. "Why not?" "Because once I tell you, there will be no undoing it. You will look at me differently, and I am not certain you are ready for that." "You do not get to decide what I am ready for," Elena said, her voice sharper than she intended. "You have spent weeks hinting at secrets you refuse to share, while somehow already knowing mine. That is not fair, Mr. Ashford." He stopped walking entirely and turned to face her, his expression unusually open. "You are right," he said quietly. "It is not fair. But some truths, once spoken, cannot be unspoken. I need you to trust me a little longer before I say more." "Trust is not something I give easily," Elena said, "especially not to a man who already seems to know more about my past than my own family does." Julian's jaw tightened, and for a moment, she thought he might finally give her the answer she wanted. Instead, he simply said, "You deserve honesty, Elena. I intend to give it to you, but the timing must be right. If I tell you too soon, you may not believe me, and I would rather you hear the full truth than a piece of it that leaves more questions than answers." She wanted to press further, but something in his eyes convinced her that pushing harder would only make him retreat behind his careful walls again. She let the matter drop, though it lingered in her mind long after he left. That night, she returned to the wooden box hidden beneath her floorboards. She unfolded the letter inside, reading the familiar words she had memorized years ago. It was written in a hand she did not recognize, describing events from a night she wished she could forget. The letter had been left for her anonymously, slipped beneath her door the morning after everything happened, as though someone wanted her to know that she was not as alone in her secret as she believed. She had always assumed the letter came from someone in the village, perhaps a witness who chose silence over exposure. But now, staring at the careful handwriting, a new and unsettling thought took root in her mind. What if the letter had come from Julian himself? The idea felt impossible, yet it explained too much to ignore. His knowledge of the cliffs, his unwavering certainty when he looked at her, as though he already understood things about her that no stranger should know. If Julian had written that letter years ago, then their connection went back much further than either of them had admitted. The following week, Elena found an opportunity to test her theory. During a quiet moment at her father's estate, while Julian reviewed documents at the study desk, she placed a blank sheet of paper beside him and asked him to sign a formal request for the wedding officiant. She watched closely as he wrote his name, studying the shape of his letters, the particular slant of his handwriting. Her chest tightened. It was unmistakably similar to the handwriting on the letter hidden beneath her floorboards. She said nothing in the moment, but her mind raced with new questions. If Julian had written that letter, it meant he had known about the incident on the cliffs long before their engagement was arranged. It meant their meeting was not coincidence, not simply a convenient business arrangement between two families. It meant Julian had sought her out deliberately, for reasons she still did not understand. That evening, she confronted him, though not directly. She invited him to walk with her along the garden path after dinner, using the quiet hour to finally ask the question that had haunted her all week. "Did you write me a letter?" she asked. "Years ago. About the cliffs." Julian stopped walking. The silence between them stretched long enough that Elena felt certain she already had her answer. "Yes," he finally admitted. Her breath caught. "Why?" "Because I was there," he said. "That night. I saw what happened." Elena's pulse pounded in her ears. Her carefully controlled composure cracked, replaced by a wave of fear and confusion, so strong she had to steady herself against the garden wall. "You were there," she repeated slowly. "All this time, you knew, and you said nothing." "I said nothing because exposing the truth would have destroyed you," Julian said, his voice low and urgent. "I chose silence to protect you, Elena, even though it meant carrying the weight of that night alone. How do I know you are not the one who caused it?" she asked, her voice trembling. Julian's expression darkened, though not with anger directed at her. It looked instead like old, unresolved pain. "I did not cause what happened," he said, "but I have spent years living with the guilt of not stopping it in time. That guilt is part of why I sought this marriage. I wanted the chance to finally make things right, to protect you the way I should have protected you back then." Elena stared at him, her mind spinning with disbelief. Everything she thought she understood about their arrangement shifted beneath her feet. This was not a simple business transaction between two families. This was something far more complicated, tangled in guilt, secrecy, and a connection neither of them had chosen, but both were now bound to. "I need time," she said finally, stepping back from him. "I cannot process this, standing in a garden as though it were ordinary conversation." Julian nodded, though the pain in his eyes was unmistakable. "Take whatever time you need," he said, "but please know that everything I have done since meeting you has been an attempt to protect you, not harm you." She walked away without responding, her thoughts a storm of fear, anger, and a strange, unwelcome flicker of understanding. For the first time since her father announced the engagement, she realized that Julian Ashford was not simply a stranger forced into her life. He was someone bound to her by a shared history she had never known existed, a history rooted in the very secret she had spent years trying to bury. That night, sleep refused to come. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every guarded glance, every moment that suddenly made sense in a new and unsettling light. Julian had known her secret before they ever met. He had watched her from a distance for years, carrying his own guilt in silence, waiting for a moment to finally step into her life and attempt to make amends. She did not know yet whether to trust him or fear him, but she understood, with growing certainty, that their connection ran far deeper than either of their families realized, and whatever truth remained unspoken between them was about to change everything. The next morning, Elena avoided the breakfast table, choosing instead to walk the long path toward the eastern cliffs alone, for the first time in years. The wind carried the scent of salt and cold stone, and the familiar sound of waves crashing below stirred memories she had spent years trying to silence. She stood at the edge, staring down at the rocks, remembering the panic of that night, the desperate choices made in seconds that had shaped the rest of her life. She thought of her brother, Nathaniel, who had died that night, and the promise she made never to speak of the truth behind his death. Guilt still lived in her chest, like a stone she carried everywhere. If Julian truly had been there, if he had witnessed what really happened, then he understood a part of her no one else in her life ever could. When she returned home, her father noticed the salt in her hair and the redness in her eyes, but he said nothing. He had learned long ago not to ask about her visits to the cliffs. Later that afternoon, a letter arrived from Julian, delivered by a young messenger boy. Inside, in the same handwriting she now recognized, he wrote a single line. "Whenever you are ready to hear the rest, I will tell you everything, without hiding anything further." Elena folded the letter carefully and placed it beside the older one in her wooden box. Two letters now, separated by years, both written by the same hand, both tied to the same unbearable night. She realized, with a strange mixture of dread and relief, that she was no longer facing her past alone. Whatever happened next, Julian Ashford would be standing beside her, carrying the same weight she had carried in silence for far too long. 3 days passed before Elena agreed to hear the rest of what Julian had to say. She sent word through the household staff, asking him to meet her not in the garden, where servants could overhear, but at the small stone chapel on the edge of her father's property, a place rarely visited except during holidays. Julian arrived exactly on time, dressed simply, without the formal coat he usually wore to impress her father. He looked tired, as though the days apart had weighed on him as heavily as they had weighed on her. "Thank you for coming," Elena said, standing near the chapel entrance. "I would have come the moment you asked," Julian replied. "I only wish you had not needed days to decide whether you wanted to hear me at all." "I needed time to decide whether I could bear to hear it," she said honestly. "Now I am ready. Tell me everything, from the beginning." Julian took a slow breath, glancing toward the small window where afternoon light filtered through colored glass. "My family and yours were connected long before either of us was born," he began. "My father and your father were once close friends, business partners even, before a disagreement broke that friendship apart. I did not learn the details until much later, but the argument involved money, land, and a debt your father never fully repaid." Elena frowned. "I never knew our families had any history together." "Most people do not," Julian said. "It was kept quiet, buried the way most inconvenient truths are buried among families who care more about appearances than honesty. My father resented yours for years afterward, and that resentment shaped much of how I was raised. I grew up hearing your family's name spoken with contempt, though I never understood why until I was older." "What does this have to do with the cliffs?" Elena asked, her voice tightening with impatience. Julian met her eyes. "I am getting there. Please, let me explain it properly." She nodded, though her hands trembled slightly at her sides. "When I was 17, Julian continued, my father sent me to observe your family's estate, hoping to gather information he could use against your father in a legal dispute over the disputed land near the coast. I did not want to go. I found the entire arrangement distasteful, but I was young, and my father's expectations were not something I felt strong enough to refuse." "So you spied on us," Elena said flatly. "Yes," Julian admitted, without flinching from the word. "I am not proud of it. I spent weeks watching your family from a distance, taking notes my father demanded, feeling increasingly uncomfortable with what I was doing. And then, one night, I saw you and your brother walking toward the cliffs." Elena's breath caught, her entire body going still. "I almost turned back," Julian said quietly. "I told myself it was not my place to intrude, but something about the way you two were arguing made me stay hidden and watch. I saw Nathaniel step too close to the edge. I saw you try to pull him back. I saw the rocks give way beneath him, before either of you understood what was happening." Tears filled Elena's eyes, though she fought to keep them from falling. "I have relived that moment every night since it happened," she whispered. "I told everyone it was an accident. I told them I found him already gone. I never told anyone that I was standing right beside him when he fell, because I was too afraid they would blame me." "I know," Julian said gently. "I saw everything, Elena. I saw you try to save him. I saw you scream for help that never came in time. I saw the moment you realized there was nothing more you could do." "Then why did you not come forward?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why did you let me carry this alone for so many years?" Julian's expression filled with visible regret. "Because I was afraid," he admitted. "My father would have used what I witnessed as a weapon against your family, twisting the truth to serve his own interests. I could not allow that to happen to you, so I stayed silent, and instead, I wrote you that letter, hoping it would offer some comfort, some proof that someone understood the truth, even if you could never speak it aloud." "A comfort," Elena repeated bitterly. You have no idea what that letter did to me. I spent years wondering who else knew. I spent years afraid that whoever sent it would use it against me one day. I never intended to threaten you, Julian said quickly. I only wanted you to know you were not alone in carrying that memory. Elena turned away from him, staring instead at the small altar at the front of the chapel, her thoughts a chaotic mixture of grief, anger, and something unexpected, a fragile sense of relief at finally speaking the truth aloud to someone who already understood it. Why did you seek this marriage? She asked after a long silence. Why now, after all these years? Julian hesitated before answering. My father passed away last year, he said. Before he died, he confessed to using information about your family for years to maintain leverage over your father, threatening to expose old debts and secrets whenever it served him. When I inherited the estate, I discovered documents proving just how deeply my father had trapped your family in financial obligation. I could have used that leverage myself. Instead, I chose to end it. By marrying me, Elena said slowly. By offering you a future built on honesty instead of manipulation, Julian said. I know it does not undo what my father did, or what I witnessed and stayed silent about, but I wanted the chance to make things right, even if it meant risking your anger once you learned the truth. Elena turned back to face him, studying his face for any sign of deception. She found none. Only exhaustion, guilt, and a quiet hope that she might eventually understand why he had done what he did. I do not know if I can forgive you, she said honestly. Not yet. I am not asking for forgiveness, Julian replied. I am only asking for the chance to prove that I mean what I say. That this marriage, whatever began it, can become something real, built on truth instead of secrets. Elena said nothing for a long moment, the weight of years finally settling into something she could almost name. Grief for her brother. Anger at the silence that had surrounded his death. And beneath it all, a strange, unexpected gratitude that someone else in the world finally understood the truth she had carried alone for so long. I need to visit the cliffs, she said suddenly. Will you come with me? Julian's eyes widened slightly, surprised by the request, before he nodded. If that is what you need, I will come. They walked together in silence, leaving the chapel behind, making their way toward the same path Elena had walked countless times alone. When they reached the edge, the wind picked up, carrying the familiar salt air that always reminded her of the night everything changed. I used to come here to punish myself, Elena admitted, staring out at the water. To remind myself of what I could not save. You did everything you could, Julian said quietly. I saw it myself. There was nothing more you could have done. For the first time in years, standing at the edge of the cliffs beside someone who finally understood the truth, Elena allowed herself to cry, not from fear or guilt, but from the simple relief of no longer carrying the memory entirely alone. Julian stood beside her, silent and steady, offering no false comfort, only his presence, which somehow felt like enough. As the sun began to set behind them, casting long shadows across the grass, Elena realized that whatever came next between them, whether trust, forgiveness, or something deeper, it would have to be built slowly, carefully, on the fragile new honesty they had just created. The secret that once separated them completely had, in the strangest way, become the very thing drawing them together. In the days that followed their conversation at the cliffs, something between Elena and Julian shifted, quietly but unmistakably. They no longer treated each other as strangers bound by an arranged contract. Instead, a fragile partnership began to form, built on the shared weight of a secret only the two of them fully understood. Julian visited more often, though their meetings no longer centered solely on wedding preparations. They spent afternoons walking the estate grounds, discussing everything from Nathaniel's childhood memories to Julian's own difficult relationship with his father. Elena found herself, to her own surprise, beginning to trust him, not blindly, but gradually, the way trust is meant to be earned. Still, her father's financial troubles loomed over every conversation, a shadow neither of them could fully escape. One afternoon, while reviewing the wedding budget with her father's solicitor, Elena discovered a set of documents that had clearly been overlooked, tucked beneath a stack of unrelated papers in her father's study. She recognized her father's signature, along with a name that made her stomach twist with unease. A substantial loan, taken years earlier from Julian's late father, still unpaid, with interest that had grown far beyond the original amount. She confronted her father that evening, the documents spread across his desk between them. "You never told me we owed the Ashford family this much," she said. Her father's face paled. "It was not something I wanted you to carry. You let me believe this marriage was about respectability, about Julian simply admiring me from a distance," Elena said. "But this debt is the real reason he sought this arrangement, is it not? To settle old business between our families?" "The debt is part of it," her father admitted reluctantly. "But Julian could have simply demanded repayment through the courts. Instead, he offered marriage, which forgives the debt entirely and secures your future at the same time. Whatever his reasons, Elena, he has been more generous than either of us deserves." Elena left the study with more questions than answers, though this time, instead of confronting Julian with suspicion, she sought him out with a desire to understand fully. She found him the following day, overseeing repairs near the eastern edge of his own estate, close enough to her family's land that the two properties nearly touched at the cliffs. When she explained what she had discovered, Julian did not seem surprised. "I know about the debt," he said simply. "I have known since I inherited my father's records. I chose not to mention it because I did not want you to think our marriage was only about erasing old financial obligations." "Is it?" Elena asked directly. "No," Julian said, meeting her eyes. "The debt gave my father a reason to arrange this marriage originally, before he passed, but my reasons for continuing with it have nothing to do with money. I want you to believe that, even if it takes time to prove." Elena studied him carefully, searching for any hint of deception, finding instead only quiet sincerity. "I am trying to believe it," she admitted, "but everything about this arrangement began with secrets. It is difficult to trust something built on so many hidden truths." "Then let us build something new," Julian said, "not based on my father's debts or your father's desperation, but on honesty between the two of us, starting now." It was a simple offer, yet it carried more weight than any formal proposal ever could. Elena found herself nodding slowly, accepting not just his words, but the fragile hope they represented. Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened in small, meaningful ways. Julian shared stories of his mother, who had died when he was young, and the loneliness that shaped his childhood under his father's controlling influence. Elena, in turn, spoke more openly about Nathaniel, about the guilt she carried, and about the years she spent pretending to be fine, while quietly breaking apart inside. Through these conversations, Elena began to see Julian not as the stranger her father had forced upon her, nor as the silent witness to her darkest memory, but as someone equally shaped by loss, guilt, and the impossible expectations of families, more concerned with reputation than happiness. Yet even as trust grew between them, an unease lingered beneath the surface. Word of the engagement had spread throughout the town, and with it came whispers, questions, and the attention of people who remembered the old rivalry between the Whitmore and Ashford families. Elena began noticing strange glances from neighbors, overheard fragments of conversation that stopped abruptly whenever she entered a room. One evening, a family friend, a woman named Margaret Colby who had known Elena's mother years ago, pulled her aside during a social gathering with a warning veiled as concern. "Be careful, dear," Margaret said quietly. "Not everyone believes this marriage is as simple as it appears. Some say the Ashford family has never done anything without expecting something greater in return." "What are you suggesting?" Elena asked. Margaret hesitated before answering. "Only that you should watch closely. Julian Ashford is not the only one interested in your hand. There are others who feel slighted by this arrangement, others who might not take kindly to being passed over." Elena thought of Edmund Clark, a wealthy landowner who had shown clear interest in courting her, before Julian's proposal disrupted his plans. She had dismissed his attention as harmless before, but Margaret's warning left her unsettled, a quiet reminder that their fragile new trust existed within a world still full of old rivalries and hidden motives. That night, she relayed the conversation to Julian, watching his expression carefully as she spoke Edmund's name. "I am aware of Edmund's interest," Julian said, his jaw tightening slightly. "He made his intentions toward you known before our engagement was finalized." "He did not take the news well. Do you think he would try to interfere?" Elena asked. "I do not know," Julian admitted, "but it would be wise for us to remain cautious. Men like Edmund do not easily accept losing something they believe belongs to them. Elena felt a familiar chill settle over her, the same instinct that had warned her about danger long before she understood its shape. She had spent years protecting a secret buried at the cliffs, only to have it slowly unravel through Julian's honesty. Now, a new threat loomed on the horizon, one rooted not in old family debts, but in wounded pride and jealousy. As the wedding date drew closer, Elena realized that the fragile peace she and Julian had built together might soon be tested by forces neither of them could fully control. The warning came sooner than either of them expected. 3 days after Margaret Colby's cautionary words, a letter arrived at the Whitmore estate, addressed to Elena in unfamiliar handwriting. She opened it alone in her room, her hands trembling as she read the contents. The letter claimed to know the truth about Nathaniel's death, describing details that only someone with intimate knowledge of that night could possibly write. It did not name Julian directly, but the implication was clear enough. Unless Elena ended her engagement immediately, the writer threatened to make the truth public, twisting the story into something far darker than the tragic accident it truly was. Elena's blood ran cold as she read the final line, a demand that she meet the sender alone at the old mill on the edge of town within 3 days, or risk having her family's reputation destroyed beyond repair. She brought the letter to Julian immediately, finding him at his estate reviewing correspondence in his study. His expression darkened as he read it, his hands tightening around the paper. "This is Edmund's doing," he said, though there was no direct proof, only certainty rooted in instinct. "How can you be sure?" Elena asked. "Because he is the only one bitter enough to use something this cruel to reclaim what he believes was taken from him," Julian said, "and he has resources enough to have learned fragments of the truth, even if not the full story." "What do we do?" Elena asked, fear creeping into her voice. "If this becomes public, it will not matter that it was an accident. People will believe whatever version sounds most scandalous." Julian set the letter down carefully, his expression hardening with resolve. "We will not let that happen," he said, "but we must be careful. If Edmund is behind this, confronting him directly without proof could make things worse." Over the following 2 days, Julian quietly gathered information, speaking discreetly with members of the household staff, tracking correspondence, and searching for any thread that might connect Edmund Clark to the anonymous letter. Elena, meanwhile, struggled to maintain a calm appearance in public, attending social functions with her father, while the threat hung over her like a blade ready to fall. During one such gathering, held at a neighboring estate to celebrate a local harvest festival, Elena found herself face to face with Edmund, for the first time since the engagement was announced. He approached her with a practiced smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "Miss Whitmore," he said smoothly, "I trust wedding preparations are proceeding well." "They are," Elena replied carefully, watching him for any sign of guilt. "It is a shame, really," Edmund continued, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I had hoped for a different outcome myself, but I suppose some secrets are worth more than a simple courtship, are they not?" Elena's heart pounded, though she forced her expression to remain neutral. "I do not know what you mean." Edmund's smile sharpened slightly. "Of course you do not," he said, "but perhaps you should consider carefully what you are willing to risk to protect the Ashford name, Miss Whitmore. Some debts, once revealed, cannot be repaid with an apology." Before she could respond, he excused himself politely, leaving her standing alone with confirmation of exactly what she feared. Edmund knew something, whether the full truth or only fragments, and he was clearly willing to use it as leverage to destroy the engagement he resented. She relayed the conversation to Julian that evening, and his expression turned grim. "He all but confirmed it himself," Julian said. "We need to act quickly, before he decides to follow through on his threat." "What can we do?" Elena asked. "If we confront him without proof, he will simply deny everything, and we will have exposed our fear without gaining anything in return." Julian paced the length of his study, thinking carefully. "We need proof of his intentions," he finally said. "If he sent that letter, there will be evidence somewhere, in his handwriting, his correspondence, or through someone he trusted to deliver it." Together, they devised a careful plan. Julian would arrange to meet Edmund, under the guise of discussing land boundaries between their estates, a common enough excuse that would not raise suspicion. During the meeting, a trusted servant, loyal to Julian, would search Edmund's study for any evidence connecting him to the threatening letter. The plan carried risk, but neither of them saw another option. If they waited for Edmund to follow through on his threat, the damage to Elena's reputation, and to Nathaniel's memory, would be impossible to undo. 2 days later, Julian arrived at Edmund's estate as planned, engaging him in lengthy conversation about disputed property lines, while his trusted servant slipped quietly into the house. Elena waited anxiously at home, pacing the length of her room, praying the plan would succeed without exposing them to greater danger. When Julian returned that evening, his expression carried a mixture of relief and anger. "We found it," he said, holding out a folded piece of paper. A draft of the letter, hidden among his private correspondence. The handwriting matches exactly. Elena's hands trembled as she took the paper, staring at proof of the very threat that had haunted her for days. "What do we do with this?" "We confront him," Julian said. "Not publicly, not yet, but privately, with enough evidence that he understands the consequences of following through on his threat." The following afternoon, Julian arranged a private meeting with Edmund, insisting that Elena attend as well, despite Edmund's clear discomfort at her presence. When Julian presented the draft letter, Edmund's confident demeanor cracked entirely, revealing the desperation beneath his carefully maintained composure. "You have no right to search my private affairs," Edmund said, his voice tight with anger. "And you had no right to threaten Elena with a secret that was never yours to expose," Julian replied evenly. "Understand this clearly, Edmund. If you attempt to spread this story, or any twisted version of it, I will ensure the full truth about your attempt at manipulation becomes known throughout the entire county. Your reputation would suffer far more than ours." Edmund's jaw tightened, though he said nothing, clearly recognizing the strength of Julian's position. After a long, tense silence, he finally nodded, a reluctant concession that the matter would end here. Elena left the meeting with a strange mixture of relief and exhaustion, the threat finally neutralized, though the fear it had stirred within her lingered long after they returned home. Julian walked beside her in silence, his presence steady and reassuring, in a way she had not expected to rely on so completely. "Thank you," she said quietly, as they reached her family's estate, "for protecting me, and for protecting Nathaniel's memory." "You do not need to thank me," Julian said. "I promised you honesty and protection from the very beginning. I intend to keep that promise, no matter what challenges come our way." Standing together in the quiet evening light, Elena realized that whatever fear had once defined her feelings toward Julian Ashford had transformed into something entirely different, a fragile, growing trust built through shared adversity. The secret that once threatened to destroy her had instead become the foundation of an unexpected partnership, one built not on convenience or debt, but on genuine care for one another's well-being. As the wedding day drew closer, Elena found herself, for the first time since her father announced the engagement, looking forward to the future rather than fearing it. On the morning of the wedding, Elena stood before her mirror once again, just as she had the night her father first announced the engagement. This time, however, the reflection staring back at her looked different. Her eyes no longer held the same fear and resentment she remembered from that first evening. Instead, there was a quiet steadiness, a sense of peace that had grown slowly over the past weeks. Before the ceremony began, she asked for one final conversation with her father, alone in his study. He looked up as she entered, his expression cautious, as though he expected another confrontation. "I want you to know," Elena said, "that I understand why you made the choice you did. I do not fully forgive the secrecy, but I understand the fear that drove it." Her father's shoulders relaxed slightly. "I only ever wanted to protect this family," he said, "even if my methods were flawed." "I know," Elena replied, "but from now on, I want honesty between us, not protection built on hidden truths." Her father nodded, his eyes glistening with something close to regret. "You have grown into a woman far stronger than I ever gave you credit for," he said. "Julian is fortunate to have earned your trust." "He did not simply earn it," Elena said. "He worked for it, honestly, even when the truth was difficult to share." With that, she left the study, making her way toward the small chapel where the ceremony would take place, the same chapel where Julian had first told her the full truth about Nathaniel's death. Julian stood waiting at the altar, dressed simply, his expression carrying none of the guarded composure she remembered from their first meeting. Instead, His eyes held open affection, gratitude, and quiet relief that the fears which once threatened to tear them apart had finally been resolved. As Elena walked down the aisle, she thought of everything that had led to this moment, the anger she felt when her father first announced the arrangement, the fear of learning that Julian already knew her deepest secret, the painful confrontation at the cliffs, where the truth about Nathaniel's death finally came into the light, the threat from Edmund, and the fragile trust that grew stronger through overcoming it together. None of it had been simple. None of it had followed the path she once imagined for her life. Yet standing here now, facing a man who had proven his honesty and loyalty through every difficult trial, Elena felt something she had not expected to feel when this arrangement first began: genuine hope for the future. The ceremony itself was brief, guided by simple vows exchanged between two people who had built their bond on hard-earned truth rather than empty promises. When Julian took her hand, his grip was steady, his eyes locked onto hers with a sincerity that needed no further words. "I promise to protect you," he said quietly, during the private exchange of vows. "Not because duty demands it, but because I choose to. Every single day, for the rest of our lives." Elena felt tears gather in her eyes, though this time, they carried none of the grief or fear that had defined so much of her past. "I promise to trust you," she replied, "not blindly, but honestly, the way you have earned." As the small gathering of family and close friends applauded their union, Elena glanced briefly toward the chapel window, catching a glimpse of the distant cliffs, where her past had once nearly destroyed her future. For years, that place had represented only grief and secrecy. Now, standing beside Julian, she understood that even the darkest truths could eventually lead toward healing, provided there was enough courage to face them honestly. After the ceremony, as guests gathered for a modest celebration in the estate gardens, Julian found a quiet moment to speak with Elena privately, beneath the same old oak tree where they had first discussed the arrangement neither of them originally wanted. "Do you regret any of this?" he asked softly. "The secrets, the fear, everything that brought us here?" Elena considered the question carefully before answering. "I regret the years I spent carrying Nathaniel's memory alone," she said. "But I do not regret you, Julian. If anything, I am grateful that the truth found its way to me through someone who understood its weight as deeply as I did." Julian smiled, a rare and genuine expression that softened the careful composure he had maintained throughout their courtship. "Then perhaps," he said, "this arrangement, however it began, was never truly a mistake." "No," Elena agreed, looking out toward the horizon where the cliffs met the sea. "It was simply the beginning of something neither of us expected, but both of us needed." As the sun set over the Whitmore estate that evening, casting warm golden light across the gathered guests, Elena Whitmore, now Elena Ashford, allowed herself to feel something she had denied herself for years: genuine happiness, built not on the absence of hardship, but on the strength found in facing it honestly, together with someone who had chosen truth over silence, and love over convenience. Their story, born from secrets and fear, had finally become one of trust, healing, and a future neither of them had dared to imagine when it all began. A year passed since Elena and Julian exchanged their vows beneath the old oak tree, and the estate that once felt heavy with secrets now carried a different atmosphere entirely, one of quiet renewal and steady partnership. Elena often found herself walking the same path toward the eastern cliffs, though the visits no longer carried the same weight of grief they once held. Instead, she came to remember Nathaniel with tenderness rather than guilt, often bringing fresh flowers to lay near the edge where he had once stood. Julian frequently joined her on these walks, understanding, without needing explanation, why the place still mattered so deeply to her. Their marriage, built initially on secrets and obligation, had grown into a genuine partnership shaped by honesty, patience, and mutual respect. They spoke openly now about difficult subjects that once felt impossible to voice, whether about grief, family expectations, or the fears that had shaped both of their childhoods. Elena's relationship with her father also continued to heal slowly. He visited often, no longer hiding financial troubles or difficult truths behind carefully worded excuses. Their conversations, though sometimes still tense, carried a new honesty that had been absent for most of Elena's life. Edmund Clark, meanwhile, left the region entirely within months of the confrontation, choosing to relocate rather than face the lingering embarrassment of his failed attempt at manipulation. Occasionally, rumors of his activities elsewhere reached the town, though Elena found she no longer carried fear or anger toward him. His threat, once terrifying, had ultimately strengthened the bond between her and Julian rather than destroying it. As the estate flourished under their combined efforts, Julian expanded charitable programs, supporting local families struggling with the same financial hardships his own father had once exploited for personal gain. Elena worked alongside him, using her understanding of loss and resilience to guide programs supporting grieving families throughout the region, an effort that felt deeply personal given everything she had endured. One evening, as they sat together on the same garden bench where Julian had first hinted at their shared history, Elena reflected on how far they had come since that tense first dinner, when she believed herself trapped in a marriage forced upon her by circumstances beyond her control. "Do you remember how frightened I was of you, that first night?" she asked, smiling faintly at the memory. "I remember," Julian said, his voice warm with quiet affection. "I was frightened too, though I hid it well. I worried that once you learned the truth, you would never be able to look at me without seeing my father's mistakes, or my own failure to speak sooner. I see none of that now," Elena said honestly. "I see someone who chose honesty over comfort, even when it was difficult. That mattered more than anything else." Julian took her hand gently, the same steady grip she had come to rely on through every difficult moment since their arrangement began. "Whatever challenges come next," he said, "I intend to face them the same way, honestly, and together." Elena rested her head against his shoulder, watching the sunset paint the sky above the cliffs in soft shades of orange and gold. The secret that once threatened to destroy her life had instead led her toward an unexpected but deeply meaningful love, one built not on the absence of hardship, but on the courage to face it honestly, side by side. Their story, which began with fear, secrecy, and an arrangement neither of them wanted, had become something far greater than either had imagined, a partnership rooted in trust, healing, and enduring love, strong enough to carry them through whatever the future still held.